But I just couldn't get to sleep. I felt cold, and it was in the middle of June, so it couldn't have been too cold out. But anyway, I finally started to doze off, and then some rocks probably around this size here come rolling down the cliff, something like that. And that's what woke me up. So I stood straight up in the sleeping bag, and I grabbed my shotgun, which was quite close, and my light. And I shone it up there, and the beam of the light hit the creature right in the face. So I grabbed the light and the handle of the gun, and I shot at the creature several times, and it seemed to back off. And dust would fly off his chest when the shot hit him. It acted as if I would come up and to shove you.
Just oomph type.
Yeah, just the pressure of the shot hitting seemed to shove him back some, but it had no real effect on him.
How do you describe what you saw standing on the top of that cliff?
Very awesome. Just huge and enormous and very ugly.
How big in the sense of the chest size or the arms and so on?
I would say his arms were as big around as my legs probably, and probably about 3.5, 4 feet across here. Very large.
And how tall?
Anywhere from 7 to 8 feet.
On the southern tip of Alaska's Kenai Peninsula, 16 miles from the nearest town, and reachable only by boat, sits the rotting skeleton of a settlement called Portlock. Moss climbs over collapsed cannery walls. Rusted machinery sits half-swallowed by the forest floor. No one has lived there since the early 1950s. Officially, it's one of hundreds of small Alaskan communities abandoned when the region's road network passed it by. Unofficially, for the people who trace their families back to it, Portlock is the place their ancestors fled, not because of geography, but because of something that lived in the woods. The town takes its name from a British sea captain, Nathaniel Portlock, who charted the bay in 1786. According to some retellings, his crew found the remains of an already abandoned native encampment on that first visit, and several of his men grew so uneasy, sick, unsettled, eager to leave, that they begged him to cut the survey short. No surviving record explains exactly what unsettled them. The bay, by some accounts, carried a reputation for wrongness from the very first page of its written history, decades before anyone called it Portlock at all. The settlement itself grew into a working community in the early 20th century around a salmon cannery populated largely by Sugpiaq and Russian Aleut families who had fished and hunted that stretch of coastline for generations before any cannery existed. A U.S. post office opened there in 1921, cementing Portlock as a real, mapped, functioning Alaskan fishing town. Nothing more, nothing less, at least on paper. Then the stories started. The earliest recorded strangeness, according to the oral history, passed down through descendant families, dates to just after the cannery opened. In 1905, by several accounts, every single native Alaskan worker employed there abruptly walked off the job and left town, citing only something in the surrounding woods. They stayed away for the better part of a year before quietly returning to work the following season, and no one who left ever gave a fuller explanation of what had driven them out. It's the kind of detail that resists easy dismissal precisely because it resists easy explanation too. No dramatic death, no monster sighting anyone wrote down, just an entire workforce that voted with its feet and never fully said why. From there, the stories accumulate through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in a steady, uneasy drumbeat. In the 1920s, rumors spread of something lurking near a mine outside town, alongside reports of trees found bent or damaged in ways loggers couldn't explain. By the 1930s, according to the versions of the legend collected decades later, a logger was said to have been killed by a single, devastating blow to the neck, an injury some locals insisted no bear could inflict. Gold prospectors who ventured into the surrounding hills reportedly stopped coming back. Moose and Dall sheep hunters told of freshly killed carcasses that vanished before they could return to claim them, as though something else had already taken possession of the kill. Deep in the timber, people described finding fallen trees that had been deliberately replanted upside down, roots pointing skyward, a detail that shows up again and again in Bigfoot and Sasquatch folklore across North America as an alleged territorial marker. And more than once, residents said a body would wash up in the lagoon, torn in ways that didn't match any animal attack anyone in town had ever seen. One resident, Tom Larson, is remembered in the oral history as having come face to face with the creature directly on the beach, though by his own account, he lost track of it after running for his rifle, a detail that has become almost a stock feature of cryptid encounter stories the world over. The witness who nearly gets proof and doesn't. The creature blamed for all of it came to be known as Nantiinaq, pronounced roughly Nantiinaq, a name most retellings translate as the one who steals people or those who steal people. Described as a massive bipedal, half-man, half-beast figure standing well over 7 feet tall and covered in dark hair, Nantiinaq was said to prowl the tree line at the edges of town. Elders reportedly warned children for decades to stay well clear of the lagoon and the forest after dark, and armed patrols and informal curfews are said to have become a fact of daily life in Portlock's later years, whether or not any of it was ever written down in an official log. By the versions of the story that circulated most widely, the fear became so constant and so total that by 1949 or 1950, the town's population picked up and left almost overnight, leaving only the postmaster behind until the post office itself finally closed its doors in 1950. Official tallies, where they exist at all, list around 15 people as having gone missing from the Portlock area during the years the legend covers. The Alutiiq oral tradition insists the true number was far higher, a discrepancy that either points to a folk legend inflating its own body count over generations of retelling, or to a remote, boat-only community where deaths in the wilderness simply never made it into any official record to begin with. That version of events sat quietly in regional folklore for decades, passed between families more than it was ever written down. Then, in 2009, a Homer Tribune article changed everything. It featured a detailed interview with Malania Kehl, believed to be one of the oldest living former residents connected to Portlock, who described the terror of Nantiinaq in vivid, specific detail, including, in a separate account from the same interview, a ghostly woman in a long black dress, so long she would drag it, reportedly seen drifting near the cliffs above the bay. Kehl's testimony became the single most cited piece of evidence behind the modern legend, quoted and requoted across paranormal blogs and forums for over a decade, eventually forming the emotional backbone of a 2021 Discovery Plus series, Alaskan Killer Bigfoot. That show followed a 5-man team led by Portlock descendant Keith Seville on a 40-day expedition into the ruins, with the stated goal of confronting the creature and determining whether the town could ever be resettled. Before the men set off, one village elder is shown warning them plainly to stay away from the woods and the forest that had taken his ancestors, advice that, as more than one commentator has pointed out since, rather defeats the purpose of an expedition built entirely around going into those woods. There's a detail buried in the linguistics of the story that few of the retellings mention, and that cuts directly directly against the legend's oldest claims. Researchers looking into the name itself have pointed out that Nantiinaq doesn't actually come from the Sugpiaq or Alutiiq language traditionally spoken in and around Portlock at all. It appears instead to be borrowed from Nantiinaq, a related but distinct indigenous language, where a similar-sounding word refers to a folkloric bogeyman figure used to frighten children into behaving, not a physical predator stalking the woods. The Sugpiaq people, notably, already have their own distinct word for a Bigfoot-like being, Arularak, raising an uncomfortable question for anyone treating the Nantiinaq name as ancient, untouched oral tradition. If the word itself was borrowed relatively recently from a neighboring culture's bogeyman story, how much of the rest of the legend was assembled the same way, one borrowed piece at a time? Here is where the story takes its strangest turn. Not in the forest, but in a follow-up interview almost nobody saw coming. In April of 2021, a journalist investigating the legend's origins tracked down Sally Ash, the relative who had actually translated Malania Kehl's original 2009 testimony for the Homer Tribune. What Ash revealed in that follow-up interview upended the foundation the entire modern legend had been quietly resting on for over a decade. According to her account, Kehl had simply grown exhausted of being asked over and over whether the Bigfoot killing story was true, and had essentially invented, on the spot, an elaborate account of a murderous creature stalking Portlock, mostly just to make the questions stop. Ash described sitting in the room at the time with her sisters and cousins, all of them younger than Kehl, all of them fully aware in real time that the story wasn't true, and none of them willing to contradict an elder in front of others, a cultural dynamic Ash described plainly. They simply weren't raised in a way that allowed them to tell an elder she was wrong. By Ash's account, everyone present understood the story was fabricated, quietly shared a laugh about it with Kehl afterward, and then watched it get repeated, published, and eventually broadcast to a national audience as the definitive origin story of Portlock's abandonment. It's a genuinely rare thing in the world of unexplained phenomena, not a debunking built on speculation or statistical improbability, but a direct, on-record account from someone who says she was in the room when the legend's central piece of evidence was invented. That single admission does not erase everything connected to Portlock's folklore. Ash herself maintained that she still believed some kind of Bigfoot-like creature genuinely existed in the surrounding wilderness, citing her own family's older stories and her brother's account of a frightening, foul-smelling encounter, and separately, extensive searches of Alaskan newspaper archives from the 1930s and 1940s have turned up no record at all of the murders, disappearances, or monster attacks central to the legend, a silence that skeptics say is damning, and that some locals argue simply reflects how easily a death in a remote, boat-access-only village could go unrecorded in that era. What historical records do show, consistently and without much room for dispute, is a far less supernatural explanation for Portlock's abandonment. After the completion of the Sterling Highway connected other Kenai Peninsula communities to Alaska's broader road network in the 1940s, boat-only settlements like Portlock became steadily less and less viable. There was no highway access, no reliable pipeline for schooling, no easy path to the region's growing economic centers. Families followed opportunity to more accessible towns like Nantiinaq and Seldovia, the same way small, isolated communities have quietly emptied out all across rural America for a century. Keith Seville, the Portlock descendant who led the 2021 Discovery Plus expedition and who describes himself as more skeptic than believer, even after 40 days in those woods, has said plainly that according to what he understood from his own family, people didn't leave Portlock because of killings. They left because of the economy, the schools, and the church. There was, in his words, no actual killing of people behind the move, and yet Seville is also on record saying that his time in Portlock left him with something he can't fully explain, an unshakable sense, built over 40 days of living in that specific patch of forest, that there really is something out there, even if he can't prove what. That's the strange needle this story keeps threading. Descendants who reject the killer Bigfoot narrative as their family's actual reason for leaving, while still, separately, describing an unmistakable wrongness in those woods that they're not eager to dismiss. So, which version is true? A folklore tradition rooted in generations of a diffuse, hard-to-name unease about a specific stretch of coastline, later crystallized, almost by accident, into a single dramatic killer Bigfoot narrative by one elder's tired, off-the-cuff answer that nobody around her had the standing to correct, or a real, unrecorded pattern of disappearances in a place so remote that an entire town could quietly lose people to the wilderness for decades without a single newspaper ever printing a word about it. A pattern that simply happened to align conveniently with the collapse of a fishing economy nobody particularly wanted to blame for the exodus instead. Portlock still stands today, empty, moss-covered, reachable only by boat, its cannery rusting into the tide line. People still travel out to it, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever the Sugpiaq oral tradition calls Arularak and the modern legend calls Nantiinaq. Whether they're chasing a myth born from one grandmother's tired answer to a question she was sick of hearing, or something that has simply gotten very good across more than a century at staying just outside the reach of the historical record, is a question no one, not the elders, not the linguists, not the journalists, not the 5 men who spent 40 days in that forest on camera, has ever definitively answered. What do you think really emptied out Portlock, Alaska? And if it really was just one story told by one exhausted woman to make people stop asking, why does a self-described skeptic who spent 40 days living in those exact woods still say there's something out there he can't explain?